Bueno, buenas noches a todos y a todas. Estimado vicerrector, director de la escuela, autoridades, comunidad universitaria, queridos profesores, estudiantes, invitados, estimado señor Renfro. Hace ahora 16 años que la Universidad de Málaga fundó esta escuela de arquitectura. En los últimos años hemos conseguido convertir este acto de inauguración en un acontecimiento social por el que han pasado algunos y algunas de los mejores arquitectos y arquitectas de nuestro planeta. Empezamos celebrando el 10º aniversario de nuestra escuela con la conferencia de Jean-Philippe Basal, recientemente ganador del premio Pritzker. Continuamos al año siguiente con el también premio Pritzker, Chigeruban. Seguimos con el estudio holandés MVRDV y posteriormente con la arquitecta alemana Anna Heringer. Posteriormente, en 2019, dimos un salto cualitativo con la presencia de la también premio Pritzker, la arquitecta Kazuyo Sejima. El año pasado, debido a las condiciones impuestas por las restricciones del COVID, tuvimos que celebrar este acto de forma virtual con una conferencia desde Nueva York y Caracas en el que pudimos disfrutar de un diálogo entre Kenneth Frampton y Oscar Tenreiro. El acto de inauguración de este año nos ha permitido recobrar una cierta normalidad. Después de un largo periodo complejo y difícil, donde la mayoría de los que estamos aquí presentes hemos perdido a algún ser querido o hemos sufrido el impacto de esta terrible pandemia. Desde aquí queremos recordar a todos y a todas las que han contribuido a minimizar los efectos de esta terrible enfermedad con su trabajo incansable en pro del bien colectivo. Antes de seguir mi intervención, quería dedicar unas palabras a todos los que han hecho posible que hoy nuestro invitado esté con nosotros. Quería dar las gracias, en primer lugar, al personal de su oficina en Nueva York por su inestimable ayuda en la organización de este viaje, a la Universidad de Málaga, al personal de nuestra escuela por su apoyo y colaboración, a todas las instituciones y empresas que han colaborado y sin su ayuda no habría sido posible que el señor Renfro estuviese hoy aquí. Finalmente, quería dar las gracias a todos los estudiantes que han colaborado en la organización de este acto. Este año tenemos la suerte de contar con uno de los estudios de arquitectura más relevantes del panorama internacional. Recientemente han sido distinguidos entre las 100 empresas más influyentes de la revista Times. Ha sido siempre voluntad de esta escuela acercar a nuestros estudiantes y profesores los mejores conferenciantes posibles con el objetivo de completar su formación. Nuevas miradas que deberían ampliar su percepción del mundo que nos rodea, arquitectos, arquitectas, artistas, pensadores. Los y las que tienen algo que decir tienen las puertas abiertas de esta escuela. En este caso, me he permitido la licencia de invitar a uno de los estudios de arquitectura que más he seguido en mi trayectoria profesional y docente. Tenía esta pequeña deuda conmigo mismo que por fin he podido saldar. El estudio Diller Scofidio Renfro fue fundado en 1981 con la incorporación del señor Renfro como socio en 2004, aunque ya trabajaba en la oficina desde el año 1997. Actualmente lo forman más de 100 personas en la oficina de Nueva York, a la que pronto, a principios del próximo año, se incorporará una estudiante egresada de nuestra escuela a través de la beca Arquia. Es costumbre enumerar los premios y éxitos del ponente antes de iniciar su disertación. Pero como ya hice en años anteriores y con el permiso de este auditorio, voy a centrarme en otros aspectos que considero más importantes, ya que lo anterior lo conocen todos ustedes. Ellos definen su oficina como un estudio de diseño que abarca los campos de la arquitectura, el diseño urbano, instalaciones artísticas, performance, multimedia, medios digitales e impresión, que aborda el papel cambiante de las instituciones y del futuro de las ciudades. Esto solo es posible contando con un gran equipo multidisciplinar, en el que participan arquitectos, diseñadores, artistas e investigadores. En 2016, la prestigiosa Fundación MacArthur eligió por primera vez a un estudio de arquitectura entre sus galardonados, definiendo a sus responsables como arquitectos que han creado una forma alternativa de arquitectura práctica que une el diseño, la performance y los medios electrónicos con la teoría y la crítica cultural y arquitectónica. Su trabajo explora cómo funciona el espacio de nuestra cultura e ilustra que la arquitectura cuando se entiende como la manifestación física de las relaciones sociales, está en todas partes, no solo en los edificios. Esto supone un cambio radical en la forma de entender el proceso arquitectónico. Como ocurre en muchos de sus proyectos, los límites físicos se difuminan igual que ocurre con los límites conceptuales. Estos conceptos que se han aplicado en sus proyectos más reconocidos, como el pabellón Blur, el Highland de Nueva York o la ampliación del Moma, se ve especialmente reflejado en sus proyectos educativos, que, como veremos en la conferencia, tienen relación con los nuevos criterios que estamos implementando en nuestra escuela. Se trata del concepto político de transparencia, que tiene como propósito el acercar el mundo académico al público general y así romper con su carácter exclusivo, más aún en una universidad pública como la que nos acoge. Esta estrategia permite compartir con los ciudadanos el conocimiento que se genera en el interior de sus edificios. Igual que ocurre en el Highline, los espacios se conciben como lugares de encuentro o de relación. Lugares que permiten múltiples funcionalidades, lo que redunda en una máxima optimización de los esfuerzos realizados para su consecución. Señor Renfro, para esta modesta escuela de arquitectura es un honor y un placer poder escuchar sus palabras. Sea bienvenido a nuestra universidad y espero que nuestro auditorio pueda disfrutar de su conferencia. Muchísimas gracias.
Por favor. Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes. Gracias. It's wonderful to be here. I'm going to speak in English. I hope that's okay. My Spanish you wouldn't like. ¿Por qué construir? Why build? Does building make us architects? Can we be architects without building new? Today I'm going to share with you some of the, mask. I forgot. Today I'm going to share with you some of the projects that we've been working on in our studio that don't require building new, that are about remaking buildings and places that exist, bringing a new life to these projects, bringing them up to the 21st century, having them be participants in our current culture, without tearing down, without making garbage out of these buildings, and without building new, one of the worst things we can do to our environment. Having said that, I'm going to trick you. We do build new a lot, so I'm being a little disingenuous when I suggest that our practice is directed entirely towards rehabilitation projects. In fact, we do build when a client requires a new building. However, we must ask our clients before we move into a new project if building is absolutely necessary, if there's something we can do to make architecture work in an existing structure or through different means. And in these cases, we felt compelled to build anew, except for Moma. You may recognize a few of these projects I'm not going to show. The Shed, the Broad in Los Angeles, and the United States Olympic and Paralympic Museum. I am going to talk about Moma because I consider that almost an adaptive reuse project. We also work in the education fields and in higher education in particular, and most of those projects also require that we build new. Here are 4 projects that I'm not going to show today. The Vagelos Education Center at Columbia, the Juilliard School in New York, I'm actually going to show that because that is a rehabilitation project. The Granoff Center at Brown University and the McMurtry Art and Art History Building in Stanford. Those are but a few of our more recent academic works. And one of the things we pride ourselves on more than any is making public space places for people to gather, to be together, that are democratic, that don't have ticket prices, and that can be owned by everyone. Some of the spaces that I'm talking about are Lincoln Center. I'm going to show that more. The High Line, which I will show. Zaryadye Park in Moscow, the Tide in London, and very soon in Madrid with the ASCA, the renovation of the ASCA project. We also do work inside of museums and culture centers on exhibition programs, art projects, film projects, dance projects, etc. We're very interested in the way our culture represents itself and is understood by the public. And lastly, we're very interested in the performing arts and spaces for the performing arts. The Center for Music in London, which has unfortunately been canceled because of Brexit, thank you. The college, the Holy Cross Performing Arts Center, which is nearing completion in Worcester, Massachusetts. Tianjin Juilliard School in Tianjin, China, which opened during COVID, and I have not yet been to see the project. And then Lincoln Center. So, on to Lincoln Center. So in New York City, Robert Moses was in charge of all of the culture projects and also the housing projects. And so he made a slum clearance plan for the west side of Manhattan, and Lincoln Center sat on this place where slums were taken away. And new housing was built directly behind Lincoln Center. You can see it there. Lincoln Center was built like an acropolis, a collection of elitist museums sitting many meters above the streets, with steps and stone bases that surrounded them, making them completely inaccessible. All of the egos of these architects were reflected in the design of Lincoln Center. And Lincoln Center actually works. It worked for 15 minutes a day. Between 7:45 and 8 p.m., right before curtain call, this is what Josie Robertson Plaza looked like. A teeming, humming place of publicness in the middle of New York City. But for the rest of the time, this is what it looked like. Abandoned, forlorn, De Chirico-esque, falling apart. The streets were wide, multiple lanes of traffic, tunneling under bridges. And by the way, this looks a little bit like ASCA, the project that we're beginning to work on in Madrid. You'll see some similarities. They were built in the same era. It was windy, forlorn, dangerous. And so when we were asked to renovate Lincoln Center, we thought, how can we make Lincoln Center be better than Lincoln Center? And we remember the 15 minutes of fame that it has between 7:45 and 8. And we thought, what if we were able to bring that kind of energy to the streets of New York all day long? And we did that by stripping the stone bases away, bridging the traffic to make more generous and graceful entry points, making transparent bases, and bringing the activities of the halls into the plazas, into the outdoor spaces, and announcing what things were happening inside Lincoln Center. For the first time, Lincoln Center had a front door. We also used media embedded in the architecture and as added art projects to give a sense of vibrancy that lasts all day long, every day of the week. We worked on the landscape features that Dan Kiley, America's most famous modernist landscape architect, put in place. And rather than remove them all and make them brand new, we tapped into the DNA of the site, the essence of the project. And this is what we like to do with all of our renovation and rehabilitation projects, is to understand what makes them great. Why are they there? Why are we working on them and not taking them away and starting from scratch? There must be something there that is meaningful and useful to tap into. And so here, we kept the idea of the bosque of trees, we kept the idea of the reflecting pool, of course we kept the more sculpture, but we added a new program, very simply, one little new program, which is a lawn on a hyperbolic paraboloid roof that covers a destination restaurant that's open all day, therefore becoming an attractor for the entire neighborhood. And that lawn is a public lawn. It's not just for people that have tickets. We insisted on that. When we first proposed this to Lincoln Center, they said, oh no, you can't do that. That will invite vagrants, homeless people, miscreants, and heaven forbid, students. They would want to come there and hang out on the lawn. And we said, exactly. We wanted to make a space that was for the city of New York, for the people that are visiting Lincoln Center, but also for the people that weren't visiting Lincoln Center. They wanted to just go and be on this nice piece of grass in the middle of this campus. And we wanted this piece of grass to operate as a performance space, to be a little bit of what happens on the inside of the halls, outside of the halls. In fact, we designed much of the public space of Lincoln Center to accommodate performance very informally and very formally throughout the year. In addition to the renovations of the public spaces of Lincoln Center, we were given the opportunity to renovate and expand the Juilliard School. The Juilliard School was designed by Pietro Belluschi, an Italian-American architect, in the brutalist style. You might recognize that style. You have plenty of these buildings here in Spain. I'm quite fond of them, and I thought, before we designed this, what can we do that makes this building be a better building in and of itself, and also makes a brand new building that talks about the 21st century? And how could those two things come together, each reinforcing the other and making them both better? And so you can see how we attempted to do that with the extension of the building, keeping the rhythm of the facade intact, but changing it ever so slightly as it approaches Broadway, where it becomes a very taut facade, not the muscular, brutalist facade of the old building, but a very taut and precise facade of the 21st century, with a glass wall that shears off the brutalist building, revealing everything that's going on inside of the Juilliard School. This is one of the world's most famous music schools, and yet the old building was built like a monastery. No windows, no connections to the outside, endless corridors, no natural light. With this piece of glass cuts through performance spaces, rehearsal spaces, circulation spaces, gathering spaces, offices, and a janitor closet. So you can see everything at once that goes on in the school. In addition, we made a new dance studio, which hangs down underneath the school 2 floors above Broadway, so not putting the students in some kind of strange position of having to perform in a glass box, but having a connection to the street below. For the first time, passersby on Broadway can see what's actually going on in the school, and the students can actually start to express themselves to the public. Other precise interventions in this existing school include public spaces that could also be used as gathering spaces. The Tully Hall, which is the hardest working hall of Lincoln Center, it's a 1,100-seat theater, mostly for chamber music, but it has to do a little bit of everything. It was in a basement, and it had one little door under a shadow. So what we did is, underneath the expansion of the Juilliard School, we wrapped the sidewalk in glass, and we turned that space into a new lobby. Essentially, the street and sidewalk of the city are the lobby of Tully. We put a new bar and restaurant into this lobby space and invited everybody from the street to come in without a ticket. You could have lunch and drinks here. And then you can go into the hall. The hall itself was made in the 60s, and as such looks very much like a hall from the 60s. Some people might find this charming. I actually quite liked it. And the acoustics of the hall were not so terrible, but they could be better. And over the years, the sound of the subway was infiltrating the hall, and it was only made okay because the sound of the air conditioning was louder than the sound of the subway. So part of our task, or the majority of our task, was to make this hall perform better acoustically. But a second part of the task was to make the hall feel better, to bring an intimacy to the space that would make performers and audience feel like one group, like one body. And we did that in a number of ways. First and foremost, we changed the exterior of the hall to show the acoustical adjustments we had made. The reflection of the sound was shown in the way the panels were angled. You could see the sound coming to the center of the room finally. So the image of the space is also the sound of the space. They're linked together. We also made the stage be very much part of the audience by cutting back the stage edge and having it project into the seating chamber. We wanted to make sure that the room could accommodate all the various functions that happen here, including film, dance, chamber music, orchestral music, vocal music, recitals, and product launches, including car showroom. The stage is completely adjustable. It can shrink back. You can add 120 more seats. You can use the sides as wings for a dance show, or you can simply make them be lowered for an orchestral performance. You can extend the stage into the audience chamber, and for chamber music especially, bringing the performers very deep into the house. And most importantly, we wanted to make something that changed the psychoacoustics of the room, meaning the way that you think about the room. And we did that through backlighting the wood panels around the room and wrapping audience and performer in the same band of glowing orange light, so that you feel as one with the audience or with the performance. So Lincoln Center is 13 constituent organizations, and it's controlled by dozens of agencies. So in order to make this renovation possible, we had to work with all of these different people. Some of these are our consultants. Others are the agencies that we had to get permissions from. So the point would be that making a renovation is not easy. Making a rehab is not easy. It does take work. As you all know, if you've been to rehab, it takes months. No, I'm joking. Anyway, so there is a dedication that one needs when building, when changing something or adding onto something to get it to be better. But in this case, we think we succeeded in bringing Lincoln Center into the 21st century. Another project you're probably familiar with, which is also an adaptive reuse project, is the High Line. The High Line was built in 1934 to transport food products to the west side of Manhattan for delivery all over Manhattan. It was discontinued in 1982 when the last load of turkeys came down the line. Between 1934 and 1982, interstate trucking happened, and that killed train transit for food. So it basically lay fallow for dozens of years, causing a lot of people in New York City to wonder why it's still there. Isn't this such a terrible thing? It's an eyesore. It's a hindrance to development. Who's going to build over there? Look at that. You're blocking the views and access to the river. And so there was a big movement spearheaded by Rudolph Giuliani, our former mayor, and you may know him as the lawyer to Donald Trump recently. He wanted to take it down. He thought this would improve development, in the area. And he thought it was unsafe. And sure enough, it was a little bit dangerous, but in the best of ways. A great story about how the High Line came to exist is that two people that did not know each other met at a community board meeting, and they both agreed that the High Line should stay, that it's such a wonderful asset to the city, that if people just were able to go up there and see how wonderful it is to be 30 feet above the grid of Manhattan, that people would understand that it should be kept. So they formed a thing called the Friends of the High Line, and they got a few high-profile people to back it, such as Diane von Furstenberg, the fashion designer, and a couple of film stars. And by, the city granted the Friends of the High Line permission to redevelop the line. And the initial price tag of $150 million caused a lot of consternation in New York City. What can you do with a $150 million walkway? Not much. And that makes us very happy. We didn't want this park to be a park in the traditional sense. In fact, we wanted this park to be very much what it was when we found it. A ruin of sorts, a ruin that was self-seeded and self-grown. A park, a garden had grown on the High Line in the intervening years between the closure and the in the year 2000. All the species of plants that found their way there grew there naturally, without watering, without pruning, on little more than air and dust. And so when we won the project with Pete Udolph and Field Operations, we sent, excuse me, this is a little too soon. We sent Pete Udolph up to the park, before it was a park, and he indexed every single plant in the park and all the weeds that had found their way naturally there. Because we knew that if those plants found their way there naturally and grew there year after year without any maintenance whatsoever, they might just as well grow there after it becomes a park. So in fact, 80% of the plants that are on the line now were already there accidentally when it became a ruin. The other thing that the High Line did is it passed through many different neighborhoods, including some of New York's most notorious, let's call them eccentric neighborhoods, where, some of New York's most famous eccentric clubs happened. And we wanted to make sure that the line appealed to all New Yorkers and all visitors. And it wasn't just for people to walk their dogs or to take their children to a playground, but rather it tapped into an ecosystem of a different sort, the ecosystem of New York City, in particular of downtown New York City. And so our design strategy was essentially just looking at and listening to the line and the neighbors around the line, and taking the clues for the new design directly from the ruin of the High Line. Broken concrete, green that grows through the cracks, a merger of nature and culture, that became our solution. And our solution is basically one design element, a 12-foot long precast concrete plank with tapered ends. Tapered ends let the green grow through the cracks as if it were a sort of pre-engineered ruin. The tapered planks also let us make meandering walkways that went from side to side on this narrow line. Who says there's nothing to do on the line? You can go back and forth. You can get lost. Of course, we wanted to make sure that the species that we brought back were both native but also grew well in the city without much tending. And we wanted to also make sure that they attracted the proper fauna. Not the proper, but they attracted fauna. And so the High Line has become a migratory stop for bird species and other migrating species, which is very exciting. This was the line the very first season that we planted it. Already the plants were taking to their new beds very nicely. One of the things we also wanted to do is understand the existing conditions of the line very precisely. And so we looked at every part of the line and figured out that each part had its own weather system and its own connection to the city below. For instance, here, you could see the Hudson River. It's the only place you could see the river. So we decided to turn this into a kind of beach and plant beach grasses and other things that recall being waterside. Other parts of the line were shielded from wind or they were shadowy. And the plants that we found there when we discovered it as a ruin were essentially brought back to those areas after we made it be friendly to the public. There's a section on 26th Street that launches off of the line in a graded area. You can see down to the plants. They grow underneath and all over this area. These trees that are there were among the kind of trees that we found when we looked at the ruin of the High Line. There were 26-foot tall trees in this one section of canyon between two existing buildings. It was completely concealed from wind and a lot of sun, actually. So we put those trees back. They're now at the same height as they were when we found them. This is a more recent picture of one of the stretches of the line in the fall. You can see how well the plants have taken to the line. And keep in mind that 80% of the plants that are on the line were considered weeds and were found in the existing line when we discovered it. We were also interested in taking advantage of some of the weird conditions on the line. So at 10th Avenue, giant girders were placed over the avenue really just for expediency's sake. It was a cheap bridge. Keep in mind, this was all industrial, this part of New York, when it was built, completely industrial. But by making these giant deep girders that were 3 meters deep, we were able to turn the line into, or turn this plaza into a kind of theater. And the theater would frame nothing but the views of traffic. But it would also be a place where people could gather and take it over and take over the space and make it their own. This is what it feels like to be in the 10th Avenue overlook. You would think that people wouldn't like to be here to simply look at the traffic going by. However, people do like it, and they stay there and watch the quotidian aspects of the city go by. We wanted to make the line be about turning New York into a protagonist in a kind of urban play. That the city would unfold as you walk down the line. It's almost a piece of cinema. And it would the city would present itself in many different lights. People have started to take over the line for their own activities, including this cabaret singer who at 9 p.m. every night on the first season that we opened, set up a stage on her balcony and went to serenade all the passersby. And other things happened too. The Standard Hotel was built over the line, and it was said that the owner encouraged a kind of reciprocal behavior between people in the rooms and people on the line. So this started happening, and people started going to the High Line just to witness this kind of striptease. This was so exciting to us that the line had engendered new kinds of behavior in New York that we decided to write an opera. And we wrote an opera called The Mile Long Opera. This is primarily thanks to my partner, Liz Diller. And that opera was actually written as a reflection of the life around the High Line that we discovered after the line opened. So there's a kind of meta project at work here. We took clues from people in the hotel, in the surrounding buildings, and wrote a project that was called, that was themed around the idea of 7 p.m. What would you be doing at 7 p.m.? In all of these different neighborhoods that were industrial and they were quickly being replaced by expensive condos. The mile-long opera consists of 1,000 singers stretched from one end of the line to the other. The singers were professional, amateurs, older people, church choirs, school choirs, children, opera singers, and bathroom singers. Every person you would encounter with a physical interaction. You would hear the songs that were all written on the same tone, so they could blur together. You could hear them from each singer individually, or sense them in a group of singers in a couple of locations where choruses were assembled. We worked with David Lang, the musician, on the music, and it was all the themes of the different songs were about New York City and its change from an industrial manufacturing city to a service city, a wealthy service city. And it was a unique experience because as an audience member, instead of sitting here like you are now, you actually could control your own pace. You could interact with each of the performers who were counter to traditions, actually stationary themselves. On to a couple of other projects that we're very excited about, and you might not know as well. At the University of California in Berkeley, we were asked to make a new museum, the Berkeley Art Museum and the Pacific Film Archives. We were given this site. It's an old industrial shed with 3 north lights and an Art Deco head house. In our project, and this is what it looked like in the shed. The shed was where the University of California printing press was. And it's most famous for printing the Charter of the United Nations. So it was a historic site, and we knew we wanted to keep it. What's interesting about a building like that is that industrial spaces that have few columns and great natural light have become the darlings of the art world. These are the spaces that all museums want to be in. And so it was perfect. And the head house as an office building would be perfect for the administration. So we decided to keep both of these parts of the project and then undercut them with a basement so that we'd get enough gallery space, and then add a new theater which would be completely contemporary. It would be kind of a cipher, a kind of unknown object that in combination with the old building would make a kind of dual building, a split personality building. This is what it was like to save the front building. We literally had to go underneath the entire thing and prop it up. You can see the outlines of the shed building that we had to remove to take lead paint off and asbestos off and shore up seismically. And we brought those pieces back to the site and put them in, and then we added this new piece for the theater. It's essentially a brace for the old building. So the new piece is literally keeping the old building from falling in on itself during an earthquake. So they work symbiotically. And that's the effect, a kind of dualism of the existing building and the new building that, as I said before, tries to make both sides are propped up by the other side. There's a kind of strange kind of confusion that happens, a little bit like this Wittgenstein drawing that could either be read as a duck or a rabbit. We also, in this and almost all of our other projects, strive to tell our clients or try to get our clients to make more of our projects accessible to more people more of the time. And this project achieved that by punching large picture windows into the Main Street side and allowing people to see into performance, art, retail, cafe, and theater all the way around the building. So you wouldn't even have to enter the building to see what's going on. More than that, and this is what it looked like finally, those windows were much smaller, and we made them very large. You can sit on the sills, so rather than trying to shoo homeless people away or people from hanging out, we actually invite people to become part of the complex. And the first gallery you see is actually a hybrid gallery that's partly performance and partly visual art gallery. It's completely ticket-free and visible from the street. So it's always an exciting place to go and open to the entire community. The arm that comes from the theater sort of improbably has a 3-story high space that reveals the section of the old shed building with its 3 north lights. You can see the galleries that happen underneath those shed spaces. The north lights can be open, of course. These photographs were taken when the shades were down, but it's a very flexible art space. It's always being changed according to needs, and has this kind of wonderful vertical slot, which lets all the parts of the building communicate with all the other parts of the building. This is what it looks like from the corner. I can't tell if these slides are... Anyway, it's very hard to see them from here. At any rate, and they kind of hug each other. It's a building about an embrace, an old and a new together, sort of in a nice handshake. This is like caring for your elders. You know, you don't send them away and put them in the old folks' home. You actually have them in your house and you care for them. The theater has a public component that is reciprocal to the inside theater, with a screen that invites people to stay and become part of a civic moment. Here, this particular civic moment was one of our worst moments in history of our country, but they still put it up there. And so that's part of what civic life is about. It's sort of embracing the good, the bad, and the ugly. You can't just make it pretty all the time. Moma, I forgot how much time I have. Shoot, I didn't set my alarm. Well, anyway, you'll just start falling asleep or something, or yawning, and I'll stop. So Museum of Modern Art was built as an infill structure in an old townhouse section of New York City. It was built by Edward Durrell Stone, and it was clearly modern and clearly an insertion into the streetscape. But over the years, it's been expanded ad nauseum with different architects. Of course, there's Stone, there's Philip Johnson, there's Cesar Pelli, Taniguchi, and Jean Nouvel. There was a building that was taken down for our expansion by Todd Williams, Billy Chen, but they are considered the legacy of the site. And so it became this kind of Frankenstein of a building. And I guess part of what MoMA, what we liked about MoMA, and this is sort of our research process into any project that we try to bring up, to save, is, well, what is it that makes these projects great to begin with? And you know, we can't just look back to Taniguchi. We have to go all the way back. Why did people fall in love with MoMA? Well, they did because it had houseplants. It had curtains. It had carpets. It was dark. It was a place that you could be with art like it was your own living room. It was quiet. There were only a few people there. So, and this is what MoMA had become. If you've been to New York, I'm sure you've been to MoMA, you know that it was this way. You might not have been there since the COVID has happened, but I think as of 2 days from now, you're able to fly over there. I encourage everyone to go. The MoMA is open completely. But this is what it had become, a kind of, you know, a kind of cattle car of people, noisy, clutch, of you know, hard to maneuver, no sense of where to go, how to get around the building. And then the art itself, oh, and by the way, the retail was front and center. Instead of seeing art on the street, you saw commerce. That is not what we want out of our museums. This is what the lobby looked like when it was empty. So it was actually a wonderful space, clear through from one street to the other, but with all of this furniture, just crowded up with furniture. And then when you finally get to the art, this is what you see. Another parade of selfie-taking tourists. there's no sense of commune with the art. So we remembered Moma back when it was had a project room, and when the relationship with the art was much more intimate, when the sound was more intimate, when the materials were more domestic. And that's what we wanted to bring to our new Moma. In addition, we wanted to take the commerce out of the front and center moment and drop it down. So we put the bookstore one floor below, but opened a window, I call it a horizontal window, from the sidewalk down to the bookstore. We added a section of building. I don't know if I can do, oh, here, this. I'm afraid I'm going to do something bad. Oh, yeah. So this is all our new insert. And we had to negotiate between all of these different lines and the Taniguchi and these different mullion grids, which ones to pick up, which ones to disregard. It was really tough. But we ended up making a facade with giant pieces of glass. I think these are 7 meters high, and single pieces of glass to let the galleries show through, and a new studio space, which can be used for performance, be visible. And then a set of new galleries actually on the street that you can look into, and that you can go into without a ticket. This is a section through that part that we added, and there's several new things that we did with this. One is that we made gallery spaces that look down onto one another and that are double height, so that all of a sudden you get a sense of flow and a sense of connection from one space to the next. We also made a new kind of space for Moma. It's a space that can host performance, but instead of being a theater down in the basement or up somewhere that you have to get to specifically, it's a theater that's in the circuit of the art, so it actually is like a gallery. And the walls can open up, and the chairs can go away, and these rooms, a white box and a black box, can join up. They can be one for the first time. We also did some other things that you might not even notice when you go. So we made a new entry with a double height space, and a new awning made of a single piece of steel that's actually hanging on cables and pulled down on cables, so it doesn't have any steel that you can see and say, oh wow, how is that thing being held up? It's floating in space, a little bit like a Richard Serra sculpture. And here's the bookstore dropped down a level from the sidewalk. Now you can see through to the museum and to the art. There's an art wall just behind this that has a piece of commissioned work all the time. And we added back 2 new galleries that are free of charge. You can go into them without a ticket on the ground floor. You can also see into them from the sidewalk. We added a lot of new space for resting and being together. We brought back wood floor, which was missing in the public spaces, and we also brought in wood ceilings. We extended vertical circulation spaces in 2 locations, one at the old Bauhaus stair, and we took clues from the Durrell stone stair, but we made it a 21st century version of that stair, making cantilevered steel plates and precast terrazzo treads, which recall the terrazzo treads of the past, but use technology and materials in ways that you could only do in the 21st century. So paying homage to the past, but bringing it forward. We also discovered this marble that was used in the original building that had been long forgotten, a kind of luxurious material that gives a kind of domestic quality to the building. And so we brought this back in a few key places, along with places to pause and collect oneself. We also opened up to the garden all along the facade here. The entire first floor is open to the public. We brought back in materials recalling a domestic environment, wood, perforated wood, and the sound in this room is completely dampened down. You'll have to take my word for it because you can't hear it right now, but it is very quiet. It's hushed even. And now there's art in the lobby that you see, and it's free of charge. I guess the biggest thing that we did in terms of the way the building works is we added a stair which connects the ground floor with all of the primary exhibition levels. And the stair you can see finally from the street. Instead of going here to an escalator, going here to an elevator, this to a stair, piecing together a trip, you can actually go to one place and get everywhere you need to go. And you see that before you enter the building. We wanted the stair to be 21st century to sort of show off what we could do structurally and with materials. It's all hanging from a blade above, and all of the stairs are actually cantilevered from that blade. And then when it meets the glass wall on the outside of the building, there's no guardrail. So it's as if you're suspended over the street. So bringing Moma back to the city and bringing it back to its citizens was really one of the things we wanted to do more than anything. Here are two of the galleries that I was talking about, both double height, one with a picture window to the street, the other that opens out onto the street down below. And they overlook each other, so they can make shows across floors, and they can the art can cross-reference each other for the first time. And then the special space that we made, the studio space, is intended to be a hybrid between a gallery for visual art and a performance space. This is the first show, but you can see how, even though it is a black box, it is also a gallery at the same time. And it has this wonderful picture window which looks out over a pocket park across the street. And a lot of people were nervous about MoMA's expansion, both because it seemed very greedy that after 10 years they expanded one more time. But more or less, everybody agrees that it has been a wonderful, calming addition to the museum and has brought it back to the city. It hasn't lost its visitorship, we don't think yet. It's hard to know because of COVID, but if it has, then we probably won't get another museum job. So I hope it doesn't. And then just sort of to wrap up my talk, I'm going to speak about two projects. You probably recognize this city. This is a city to the north of here in Spain called Madrid. And this is the Azca complex, which was built kind of like Madrid's new central business district north of downtown. I'm sure you all know it. You know better than me, so if I make a mistake, you can tell me later. But basically, already in the 50s, it was set up as a competition. It wasn't really built until the 60s, 70s, and it continued to take new buildings up until very recently. But as you know, and sort of like what happened with Lincoln Center, it was built when cities were different and when ambitions were different about business and the way business should work in the city. It was thought to keep businesses in the city, it had to operate as if the businesses were not in the city. And so it made it vehicle friendly. Well, we know now that that's silly, and we can make spaces that are pedestrian friendly. It was made as hardscape, which is terrible for the environment and horrible for your shins, instead of making something that's soft and more mutable. It was made with layers to separate cars and people. In doing that, it made very dark spaces and forlorn spaces. We want to bring luminosity back, light back. It was made with landscape culture that was homogeneous, self-similar trees, planting that had no diversity. We want to change that. It was built with spaces that were not intended to receive program or activity, and we're also going to try to change that. And this is Rockefeller Center. You may recognize the skating rink there. And these are the principles that bind our proposal together. Now I'm going to stop right here and just say that we're working with Fermin Vazquez's office in Madrid, and it's a wonderful collaborator. We're also working with Gustafsson Porter Bowman, landscape architect. So this is a collaborative project. And I'm also going to say that it's a commercial project, and like our Lincoln Center project has many, many heads. And so the way that this turns out may not be the way that you see it today, so please don't hold me or my firm accountable to how it's made. But these are the principles, and I think that the principles will stick. The first one is that rather than being an island disconnected from the city, we're gonna stitch it back together with throughways, new gateways. It won't just have the one gateway to the east. The second principle, it's a unified strategy of bringing new green spaces to all of the pockets of the ASCA complex throughout. The third is to make a place, a singular place, a soft place for gathering, almost a bowl where everybody can feel like they're there together, a truly public space. And we're also very interested in, of course, biodiversity, because we can't make a landscape any longer that is monocultural, that doesn't use energy wisely, that doesn't save water and reuse the water. And so we're trying to make up for some of the trespasses that the original complex had. And we're also thinking about the life of this place. It's not just the way it looks, it's the way it works. And that's so much about what our practice is thinking about how things work. We are not that interested in making things that have splashy images. We're also wondering how to reactivate the dark spaces that are underneath the pedestrian level. And so we're imagining that we could bring pop-up shops and different kinds of maker spaces and program spaces in these unactivated and unused parts of the complex. We're also thinking about accessibility and having the pathways, of course, be handicapped accessible, but also have them be visually accessible so that you know that you can come into this complex and you can circulate. And lastly, well, not lastly, but second to lastly, we're really interested in the weather and how we can change or alter Madrid's really extreme weather to make this place usable year-round. We're interested in that in almost all of our projects. And here, what we're trying to do is in summer, which can get boiling hot, as you know, make a permanent shadow. And in winter, when it can be very cold, like tonight, it's below freezing in Madrid, and bring spots of eternal sunshine. And we're going to do that ecologically. We'll show you that in a second. And this, of course, we want to have life cycles that work, rain that's collected and reused when it does rain, sun that's used to power the public spaces of the park, and it's also used to make people comfortable. So simply tapping into the resources at our fingertips in the form of the weather to make this park work. These are the different layers that we're dealing with, and so we're trying to touch almost all of the public spaces. It's very related to the work that we did at Lincoln Center. So 5 levels of spaces, and we're adding a series of tracks and walkways above all of this that let people connect through and overlook these new spaces. And then lastly, we're doing a permanent shadow and a permanent sun, and that's an art project, and it may not be part of the initial phase of work, but we are hopeful that it will be realized at some point. This is the collection of, we call them living rooms, that would be scattered throughout the park, and you'll see pictures of those in a second. Here's our plan that we did with Gustafson Porter, Bowman, with native species brought in. And I see you guys taking pictures, and I'm not exactly sure if you can publish these, just warning. They may not be publishable. So just keep that in mind, please. This is hot off the presses. Okay, so anyway. Evaporative cooling, in the summer, so it will make it a nice place to be. And every one of these pockets will have its own kind of ecosystem and hopefully be lovely to be in all the time. And just some views into that central green. Instead of a hardscape, it's actually a soft scape with planted grasses and perennials and full-grown trees. We're trying to save as many of the trees as we can. It's very difficult, but we are looking into that. In addition, there's a big amphitheater, which would be built into the northwest corner of the site. And on top of one of the existing buildings that frames the site to the west, we would have an urban farm. And that would be covered with that grid shell, similar to what we did in Zaryadye Park in Moscow, but here it would actually be a farm. And meandering through the center of the space will be a body of water that will be flowing, actually, sort of like a river, that you can put your feet in and perhaps skate on in the winter. Here's one of the concerts at night. Oops. And, oh shoot, pardon me, I've got to go backwards. This is an important slide. Okay. So, how does permanent shadow work? There's a disc, and it's cabled to the existing buildings. And you can see during the day, I think we have it in the middle of summer, what would happen is the disc would be programmed to make a place that's always in shade for everyone to gather. And this is it from another vantage point. Now, we could always move where that shadow is and preserve the grass, because if we just put the shadow in that one place, the grass wouldn't grow, and everybody would gather, and it would be trampled and ugly. So, but because of computers and logics, we can move that shadow. And then, in the winter, when the shadows are very deep and it's cold, we can use reflectors high up on the buildings to make a permanent sun that will trace through the shadows, and people can follow the sun instead of being in shade. Help me support the project, because we would like this to happen. Anyway, so permanent shadow, the summertime situation, and permanent sun, kind of winter, although they don't look like they're in winter, so apologies about the dress. Anyway, just a whole series of snapshots of potentially the way that the site will look. Again, don't hold me or my company or Fairman accountable to this. These are just concepts. We're in schematic design. But bringing all kinds of new activity to the site, making a lush and verdant landscape that's very different from the stony mineral landscape that's there, providing places for things like markets to happen, making a new farm on the roof of one of the buildings, and making places for people to play, and here to play and also to transform into other things depending on the season, making pathways that are in shade and under bosks of trees in the grass, places to gather and read, and to witness art, and perhaps to turn into an ice skate rink. Again, those are suggestions. When you get a cereal package and there's a picture of a spoon and the milk going in, and it says suggested serving. That's sort of what those were. Okay, last project I want to share with you, and then I'll be finished, and we can take questions, is in Budapest, Hungary. This is a museum, a national transport museum, and it's going to be built in a set of old industrial buildings that were started in 1867 as a place that MÁV, the Hungarian Train Authority, would repair all of their trains. So this building was built for the purposes of housing trains, and it's still equipped with tracks and other paraphernalia that were used in the making of the train. So we were truly excited to participate in the international competition to renovate these buildings into the National Transit Museum because the spaces are gorgeous. Even though they look like they were built in the 30s, they were actually built in the 60s. So this is a fairly new building, and it, of course, would have been a shame to take it down. It's got wonderful concrete trusses, castellated trusses, and there's a great history of the workforce in this site, with women having quite a few jobs in the old factory. And the building is actually a machine in and of itself. It has moving parts and pieces, very much like the trains that inhabit the building. Here's a slider that takes train cars and engines back and forth, which still works, and we will incorporate that as part of the museum. In the collection of the museum are trains, of course, but there are also buses. Hungary is famous for its Icarus bus. It supplied almost all of Eastern Europe with this kind of bus. And Trabant cars, which are two-stroke, two-cylinder cars, very inexpensive, and quite unique to Hungary. That's in Spanish. Okay, interesting. So this is what the complex looks like now. We call this the Diesel Hall. It's several many acres of space that we essentially are going to restore and reuse. And inside that, we're going to insert a very slick vitrine, a glass box that will be used to show a lot of the collection. And that vitrine will have vitrines in it. So it's a vitrine of vitrines. These vitrines coming out of the front are actually made on the existing lines that run through the building. They're surrounded by glass boxes, and some of their star locomotives are placed in them, thus bringing to the park some of the exhibits that are visible 24/7, year-round, that will be lit and available. We also wanted to make a museum where people could see these artifacts from below and above, as well as on the level of the artifacts. So we made a three-dimensional circuit that starts you out underneath engines that are on trestles above you, these vitrines, and also lets you go above them. So it's actually a 4-story building where the exhibit is experienced twice, once going one direction on the ground floor, and then another way from above on the mezzanine level, and then a whole new interpretive element that's on the top floor that allows you to look at Budapest and its traffic pattern and its train activity. We're also designing a new train station, which I'm not showing on the site. All of the new circulation pieces would be inserted in the building, so you'll understand the pieces that we've added, and they'll be colored and provide places for you to see the exhibits in a different way. As exhibit designers, we're interested in how the exhibits are shown, and we wanted the building itself to participate in the exhibit making. So by making section cuts in the building, you can actually make section cuts through the artifacts to reveal them differently. You can also use digital media in ways to provide X-ray views into the storage spaces, into the objects that are being stored. And excitingly, you can use some of the existing moving elements, such as gantry cranes, to participate in the exhibit design. We can make these elements move up and down, and in some cases we think maybe side to side. And case in point, the slider hall where the engines where the locomotives were moved will continue to work in that way, and we will constantly be taking pieces of the exhibit out and shuffling them around in a kind of performance every day. There's a cafe in the slider hall. Even the cafe is thought to be mobile. It can be reconfigured. These are almost like seats in a subway or in a train that can be reconfigured to make an eating area. And then the site itself would also extend the exhibits. This would be free of charge. Already there are train tracks running through the site. We would maintain them and we would add to them. We'd add artifacts to the outside, places to lounge and be in nature, places to have art on the outside. This is coming from the train station, the first glimpse of the building. And lastly, we were interested, as we are in all of our projects, in making it entirely sustainable. So we'll be collecting energy through photovoltaic panels and also probably a wind turbine, algae tubes, and other forms of energy collection. We'll be keeping the water and using it for irrigation. I don't think we have the geothermal field anymore. Some things one cannot afford, but we'll be growing fuel in the garden that is fuel that can be used for biofuel. So demonstrating the future of transport in the way that the garden works in nature, harnessing the sun and water and growing things. And this is what it looks like. We are in construction documents, so we are very close to starting to build the project, and we're very excited that this is going to be realized in Hungary. I think that's all I have for you. Thank you. Muchas gracias. And preguntas para mí? ¿En español? I don't know if we have time for questions, but if we do, I'm happy to shoot a couple answers out, or not, or we could go drink too. I'm happy with that. Okay, maybe I'll go down here. Okay, thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, señor Renfro. Seguimos con la última parte del acto de inauguración. En 2019, coincidiendo con la visita de la señora Kazuyo Sejima, decidimos que este acto académico se debía complementar con una parte más lúdica. En aquella ocasión tuvimos el gran honor de poder contar con la actuación de Luz Casal, que hoy también nos acompaña y a la que desde aquí mando un afectuoso abrazo. Este año, y siguiendo los criterios de calidad autoimpuestos, queríamos cerrar este acto con una artista que trajera a este espacio recuerdo de nuestra cultura más cercana. No olvidemos que este concierto es un regalo para todos y todas, pero especialmente para nuestro invitado, el señor Charles Renfro. En los próximos días se celebrará el Día Internacional del Flamenco, que en 2010 fue declarado Patrimonio Cultural Inmaterial de la Humanidad por la UNESCO. Nuestra artista invitada es una de las mejores representantes de este difícil y apasionante género. Pertenece a una saga familiar de la que ha sido todo en el flamenco. Su padre es un referente para cualquier persona que sienta pasión por la música. Él unió vanguardia con tradición a través de un proceso de investigación que le llevó a traspasar los límites hasta ese momento conocido para este tipo de cante. Ella ha seguido de forma magistral sus enseñanzas y prosigue ese laborioso proceso de no parar de investigar para ofrecer al público nuevas canciones, al mismo tiempo que respeta los cánones más escrupulosos de los diferentes palos del flamenco en un difícil y arriesgado conjunción de elementos de la que siempre sale muy airosa. Hoy podremos escuchar temas que son grandes clásicos, con otros que han sido compuestos en colaboración con compositores que son referentes de la modernidad más transgresora. Ella ha hecho un hueco en su apretada agenda para estar hoy con nosotros en este acto de inauguración de curso, por lo que no podemos más que mostrarle nuestro mayor agradecimiento. Ella es Estrella Morente.
Gracias, jefe. Vamos a hacer la alegría. Ay, 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 ay. La 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 la, la 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 la. Y si no te veo doble, ay pena me da si te veo. Y si no te veo doble, no tengo más alegría que cuando me entro a mi conde. No tengo más alegría que cuando me entro su nombre. Que mandilo, mandilo, que mandilo, mandilo, que de cabeza a cabeza me meto yo mentilo. Un día de San Juan, un torito de Barrera le hizo bailar a matraca al marqués de la Fuente Nueva y estoy por decir, ay, y por decir, no quiero a nadie, a quien quiero, no quiero a nadie quiero nada más, que yo no quiero a nadie nada más, que con las bombas que tiran los fanfarrones se hacían las estrellas, tirabuzones hermana, tirabuzones, que con las bombas que tiran los fanfarrones, que con las bombas que tiran los fanfarrones se hacen la gaditana, tirabuzones hermano, tirabuzones, que con las bombas que tiran los fanfarrones. Vamos allá. Vamos a hacer los títulos de los barcos. La leyenda del tiempo. Sí. Ponla al 3. Nadie puede abrir semilla en el corazón del sueño. El sueño va sobre el tiempo, flotando como un velero. Nadie puede abrir semilla en el corazón del sueño. El sueño va sobre el tiempo, un día hasta los cabellos, ayer y mañana comí oscuras flores de duelo sobre la misma columna, abrazado sueño y tiempo, cruza el gemido del niño, la lengua rota del viejo. Ay, espesura de ánimo nos levanta. Y si el sueño finge muro en la llanura del tiempo, el tiempo le hace creer que nace y en aquel momento, ay, como canta la noche, como canta, que témpano de hielo azul levanta. Yo alcance diese a que este lance divino tanto volar me convino que de vista me perdiese, y con todo en este trance en el vuelo quedé falto, mas el amor fue tan alto que le di a la casa alcance. Cuanto más alto subía, del hombro se me la vista, y la más fuerte conquista en oscuro se hacía, mas por ser de amor el lance di un ciego y oscuro salto, pues fui tan alto, que le di a la caza alcance. Llegaba de este lance tan subido, tan abatida yo me hallaba. Dije no habrá quien alcance y abatíme tanto y tanto que fui tan alto, que le di al alcance. Tras un espero de ver, mil vuelos pasé sin vuelo. Para que yo alcance diese. Vale. Medio tónico mío. Vale. Ay, la mía. Ay, mi vida. Que se me va, que se me va, que se me va, que se me va. Ay, a mi lengua le eché un nudo, ay, a mi lengua le eché un nudo. Quiere que me esté callada, ay, a mi lengua le eché un nudo, ay, esta gente son capaces de hacerle hablar. Ay, con la luz de la mañana. Ay, ay, a ver, abrirse las flores. Cuando el ruiseñor se calla. Abierta estaba la rosa con la luz de la mañana tan roja como reluce. Abierta estaba, nay no, nay no, nay no, nay no, nay no, no, na, y nay na, ay na, nay na, nay na, na, y nay na. Ay, yo pasé por tu ventana, me tiraste un pañuelo pa' que yo lo recogiera, me lo pusiera en el pelo, en el pelo, en el pelo.
Muchísimas gracias.
Yo adivino el parpadeo de las luces que a lo lejos van marcando mi retorno. Son las mismas que alumbraron con su pálido lucero hondas horas de dolor. Y aunque no quise el regreso, siempre se vuelve al primer amor. La vieja calle donde le codijo, tuya es su vida, tuyo es su querer. Bajo el volumen, mirar de las estrellas que con indiferencia hoy me ven volver. Con la frente marchita, las nieves del tiempo platearon mi cielo. Sentí que es un soplo la vida, que 20 años no es nada, que febril la mirada, errante en la sombra, te busca y te nombra vivir. Con el alma aferrada a un dulce recuerdo que lloro otra vez. Tengo miedo del encuentro con el pasado que vuelve a enfrentarse con mi vida. Tengo miedo de la noche que cargada de recuerdos encadena mi soñar, pero el viajero que huye tarde o temprano detiene su amor. Y aunque el olvido que todo lo destruye haya matado mi vieja ilusión, guarda escondida una esperanza humilde que es toda la fortuna de este corazón. Volver con la frente marchita, las nieves del tiempo platearon mi sien. Sentí que un soplo la vida, que 20 años no es nada, que febril la mirada, errante en la sombra, te busca y te nombra. Vivir. Muchas gracias, maestro. Ha sido un placer tocar contigo. Un agradecimiento. Volver.
Bueno, buenas noches. Damos por cerrado el acto y, bueno, nos veremos el curso que viene. Muchas gracias a todos por asistir, al señor Renfro, a Estrella Morente por su espectacular intervención y a todos ustedes por estar aquí con nosotros.